The sun shone through the tall windows of the Franklin County Courthouse, scattering light across the polished wooden benches. It was a routine Thursday morning, the kind that normally carried little excitement. Lawyers shuffled papers, court officers whispered quietly among themselves, and a few early spectators settled into the hard chairs, murmuring about parking, schedules, or the weather. Among the small crowd sat Emma, a bright-eyed 3-year-old with golden curls bouncing over her shoulders. She clutched her mother's hand tightly, swinging her little legs back and forth, her eyes darting around the vast room with curiosity and awe. Emma had been told they were just going to watch some people talk. Her mother, Julia, tried to temper her child's excitement, aware that toddlers often found mundane adult proceedings unbearably boring. Yet Emma's fascination with uniforms, badges, and authority figures meant that she wasn't content to sit quietly. Every gavel tap, every shuffling of papers, every quiet murmur seemed to capture her attention entirely. Julia leaned down and whispered softly, "Stay close to Mommy, sweetie. This is serious." Emma nodded, though she was more interested in the shapes of the lights on the ceiling than the words. The case that morning involved a suspected burglar, a man whose history included several minor violent offenses in the neighborhood. Although the charges in this particular case were relatively minor, breaking and entering, petty theft, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Law enforcement officers stationed themselves strategically around the room, ready to intervene if anything went awry. Reporters huddled near the back with notepads and cameras, anticipating at least a local news story. What nobody expected, however, was that this ordinary day would become anything but routine. Adding an unusual twist to the proceedings, the courthouse had allowed a police canine unit to make a brief appearance. The dog Rex was a well-trained German Shepherd, known for his ability to detect threats, locate missing persons, and assess dangerous situations with uncanny precision. Today, Rex was merely supposed to be a silent, reassuring presence, a demonstration of the city's canine capabilities. Julia had explained to Emma that the dog was a helper who worked with police officers to keep people safe. Emma's little hands had clutched her mother's arm in excitement, her eyes shining as she imagined Rex as a superhero in fur. As the judge entered, the courtroom fell silent, and the soft hum of conversation ceased. Emma's gaze followed him, noticing the long black robe, the crisp white collar, and the solemn expression that seemed to demand respect from everyone. The judge's eyes scanned the room before settling on the bench, where he began reviewing the morning's docket. Spectators leaned forward slightly, some with curiosity, others with anticipation, all unaware that a small observer in the front row would soon become the center of attention. Rex was led in on a leash by Officer Daniels, a seasoned canine handler with a calm demeanor. The dog's powerful frame moved gracefully, muscles rippling beneath his sleek black and tan coat. He paused occasionally to sniff the air, ears flicking toward sounds only he could hear. For the adults, this was a standard demonstration. For Emma, it was mesmerizing. She sat forward in her chair, her little hands gripping her mother's arm, eyes wide and fixed on the canine. She tilted her head slightly, as though trying to communicate silently with the dog, a tiny connection forming that no one in the courtroom could yet see. While the initial proceedings began, witnesses called, attorneys presenting preliminary arguments, Emma's attention never wavered. She noticed the way Rex's nose twitched when the defendant entered the room, the way his ears perked at certain sounds. Julia whispered explanations. "That means he's paying attention, sweetie. He's very smart." But Emma's understanding went beyond words. Something in her tiny intuition noticed a subtle tension between the man on trial and the dog. Her brows furrowed slightly, a serious expression on her small face, as if she were trying to process something adults might overlook. The gallery was mostly quiet, filled with families, neighbors, and local journalists. Spectators occasionally exchanged hushed comments about the case, the defendant's past, or the K9 demonstration. Lawyers' voices rose and fell in cadence, papers shuffled, and the gavel struck the desk with measured authority. Every now and then, a clerk would call out a name or present a document. It was the rhythm of routine courtroom proceedings. Yet beneath the surface, tension built slowly, like the quiet before a storm. Emma's focus remained on Rex. She noticed how the dog's posture changed ever so slightly as the defendant shifted in his seat. The dog's tail remained still, his muscles coiled, eyes locked on the man in a way that seemed almost human. Julia, noticing her daughter's unwavering stare, leaned down to whisper, "He's just a dog. Emma, don't be scared." But Emma only nodded subtly, her lips pursed, tiny fingers still gripping her mother's arm. Something about Rex's attention stirred a deep, instinctual recognition in the child, as the trial progressed. Witnesses described the break-in, officers recounted their investigations, and the defendant maintained his silence. Spectators tried to follow the legal terminology, but most attention was elsewhere on the interplay of child, dog, and adult tension. Emma's presence was largely unnoticed, except by her mother and the attentive K9. The courtroom seemed unaware that a moment was approaching that would shatter the monotony. A moment that would turn an ordinary hearing into a story people would talk about for months. Finally, as the defendant shifted uncomfortably in his seat, Emma leaned slightly forward. Her small voice, previously silent, trembled only slightly as she whispered, though no one could hear her words yet. Her gaze was locked on Rex, and something unspoken passed between the two. The K9 tilted his head, nostrils flaring, muscles tightening. Observers in the room felt an almost imperceptible tension in the air, a quiet prelude to the extraordinary moment about to unfold. The judge, noticing the subtle shift in atmosphere, paused the proceedings momentarily, glancing around the courtroom. Attorneys exchanged brief looks, whispering quietly. Spectators leaned forward, curious, sensing something unusual. Outside, reporters adjusted cameras, unaware that the story they were about to witness would soon become national news. In the front row, Emma's tiny chest rose and fell with anticipation. Her small hand moved slightly toward Rex, who responded instinctively, ears twitching, eyes sharp. The stage was set, though nobody in the courtroom realized it, yet the ordinary had quietly become extraordinary. And in that quiet, charged space, with polished wood, fluorescent lights, and murmuring spectators, Emma's presence poised to change everything. The courtroom waited unknowingly, the air thick with anticipation, as a 3-year-old girl prepared, without understanding, to utter words that would ripple far beyond these walls. The combination of innocence, instinct, and trained authority, the child and the K9 was about to transform a routine day in court into an unforgettable story of courage, intuition, and unexpected heroism. Rex moved quietly across the courtroom, his paws making soft thuds against the polished wooden floor. Officer Daniels kept a firm grip on the leash, guiding the German shepherd past the spectators, past the judge, and toward the defendant. The dog's movements were precise, deliberate, and measured, honed from countless hours of training. To anyone else, this was a routine demonstration of a police K9's discipline and capabilities. To Emma, however, it was mesmerizing. She leaned forward in her chair, her tiny hands gripping her mother's arm, eyes wide as she watched every flick of Rex's ears, every twitch of his tail. The air in the courtroom shifted subtly as Rex approached the front. Officers and jurors alike noticed his posture, muscles tensed, eyes focused. This wasn't unusual for trained K9 behavior, but combined with the presence of a toddler watching him so intently, the atmosphere became charged in a way no one could quite explain. Spectators murmured quietly, pointing out the dog's obedience and poise, while reporters jotted down notes, anticipating the perfect angle for a story. But all attention, however unspoken, seemed drawn to the little girl whose gaze never wavered. Emma's mind, though small and innocent, registered details most adults overlooked. She noticed the subtle changes in Rex's body language, the way his ears swiveled toward a certain sound, the way his tail barely twitched when the defendant shifted in his seat. She wasn't consciously analyzing it. She simply felt it, as if instinct whispered to her that something was not quite right. Her little brow furrowed, and her lips pressed into a thin line. Julia noticed the change, her own heart tightening. "What is it, Emma?" she whispered softly, unsure whether to intervene or simply observe. Rex stopped a few feet away from the defendant and sat, back straight, gaze fixed. Officer Daniels crouched slightly, murmuring softly to keep the dog calm. The defendant shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between the dog and the judge. A bead of sweat traced down his temple. The courtroom felt suddenly smaller, the polished wood and high ceilings shrinking as tension filled the space. Jurors leaned forward, sensing an unusual gravity. Even seasoned attorneys paused mid-sentence, momentarily thrown off by the charged silence that seemed to radiate. From the little girl and the German shepherd, Emma's fingers curled around her mother's hand, knuckles white. She wasn't afraid. Exactly, curiosity overrode fear, but she felt a strong sense that something significant was happening. The canine's presence, combined with the defendant's subtle nervous movements, stirred something inside her. It was instinct, pure and untrained, yet uncannily accurate. She whispered, almost under her breath, "Bad man." The words were so small they barely escaped her lips, but they carried a weight far beyond her age. Julia froze, unsure if she had heard correctly. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Officer Daniels stiffened slightly, noting the child's words and the timing. Rex's ears twitched, muscles coiling further, as if responding to Emma's instinctive declaration. The jurors exchanged confused glances. Reporters scribbled faster, sensing a story forming even before it fully emerged. The defendant's face paled, his confidence faltering under the combined scrutiny of the child, the dog, and the courtroom's collective gaze. Something remarkable was unfolding, unnoticed at first by most, yet impossible to ignore once attention focused on it. The judge, a man known for his calm and measured demeanor, paused mid-proceeding. He adjusted his glasses, glancing first at the child, then the canine, then the defendant. A subtle tension hung in the air, thick and almost tangible. Officers shifted in their seats, whispering among themselves about the unusual alignment of child instinct and canine reaction. Lawyers leaned toward one another, eyebrows raised, recognizing that this was no ordinary courtroom day. Emma remained still, eyes wide, small chest rising and falling in shallow breaths, as if she understood more than anyone gave her credit for. Spectators whispered in hushed tones, exchanging glances of disbelief. Some laughed nervously, unsure whether to treat this as a joke or a moment of genuine intrigue. Others watched in rapt attention, unable to look away from the unfolding scene. The courtroom, usually a place of monotony and procedure, had transformed into a stage of suspense. A 3-year-old, a German shepherd, and a man with a troubled past now commanded every gaze, every heartbeat, every thought. Even the air seemed charged, waiting for the next moment of revelation. Outside the courtroom, news of the unusual situation began to spread. Reporters had already sensed a human interest story and were preparing for potential coverage. They noted the rarity of such events, a child's words coinciding with a canine's instincts, creating an unexpected form of testimony. It was a combination of innocence and trained authority, a moment few would ever forget. Meanwhile, inside the room, Emma's mother quietly tried to explain to her daughter, It's just a dog, honey. Nothing to worry about. But Julia herself felt a shiver, realizing that sometimes truth and instinct appear in the most unexpected forms. The defendant shifted in his chair again, now clearly uncomfortable. Beads of sweat formed at his temple. He glanced at the judge, then at the K9, then back at the child. There was a subtle tension in the way he avoided eye contact with Emma, as if instinctively recognizing the truth in her words. His attempts to appear calm were failing, and the courtroom felt it. Jurors leaned forward, their attention fully captured. Attorneys whispered to each other, adjusting their strategy in real time. The scene was surreal, a perfect storm of human emotion, instinct, and authority converging in one room. Emma remained motionless, though her mind raced. She didn't understand the legal ramifications, nor did she grasp the danger implied by the man before her. What she felt was instinct, a natural recognition that something was wrong. Rex mirrored her perception perfectly, muscles coiled, ears alert, gaze unwavering. The synchronicity between child and dog was remarkable. Officers whispered among themselves, noting the accuracy of her observation and the dog's immediate response. The courtroom's energy shifted again, this time toward focused anticipation, as if everyone present could sense the extraordinary moment teetering on the edge of revelation. Time seemed to stretch. The usual rhythm of the courtroom paper shuffled, gavels struck, whispers exchanged slowed, paused by the tension in the air. Emma's tiny voice, soft but firm, broke the silence once more. Bad man, this time more confident, louder, impossible to ignore. The effect was immediate. Rex's body tensed further, growl low in his throat. Officers moved instinctively, positioning themselves closer, while jurors leaned in, eyes wide. Even the judge, renowned for his composure, straightened, acknowledging the gravity of a 3-year-old's words paired with the trained instincts of a German shepherd. Whispers swirled through the courtroom. The defendant shifted, his face draining of color. Lawyers, reporters, spectators all felt the weight of the moment. Emma remained still, small hands curled in her lap, unaware of the magnitude of her contribution. To her, it was simply an observation, a response to what she sensed around her. Yet for everyone else, it was a revelation, a perfect convergence of innocence, instinct, and trained authority. The courtroom's ordinary day had transformed into something unforgettable, a story that would ripple far beyond the walls of the Franklin County Courthouse. As Officer Daniels subtly guided Rex closer, the dog's low growl underscored the child's words. Jurors sat forward, captivated. Witnesses whispered to themselves, and the judge paused, letting the moment linger. Outside, reporters prepared their cameras, sensing that this small, extraordinary event would capture the nation's attention. Emma's mother clutched her daughter tightly, a mix of pride and disbelief washing over her. For a 3-year-old, a dog, and an ordinary courtroom, the day had become anything but ordinary, a prelude to a story of courage, instinct, and the unexpected ways truth can reveal itself. The courtroom seemed suspended in a fragile moment, every eye drawn toward the small girl and the imposing German shepherd. Emma's tiny fingers twisted nervously in her lap, but her gaze remained unwavering, locked on Rex as if they shared a private understanding. The defendant shifted in his seat, glancing nervously toward the front, unaware that a 3-year-old's perception could pierce the veil of his confidence. Officer Daniels maintained a calm grip on the leash, but even he sensed that something unusual, perhaps extraordinary, was about to unfold. Emma's mind, though young and untrained, registered patterns adults often overlooked. She noticed the defendant's subtle fidgeting, the slight narrowing of his eyes, and the way his voice faltered during earlier questioning. The dog mirrored these signals, muscles taut, ears pricked, nostrils flaring slightly with each shallow breath of the courtroom air. Emma's instincts mingled with observation, a natural sense of right and wrong, danger and safety. She didn't understand the law, nor did she know the significance of her forthcoming words, but she knew something important. A hush descended over the room as Emma leaned slightly forward, a motion barely perceptible. Her lips parted, small but deliberate, and the words that emerged were crystal clear. "Bad man." The courtroom collectively froze, the impact of her two words resonating far beyond their simplicity. Jurors blinked in surprise, exchanging wide-eyed glances. Spectators murmured softly, unsure if they had heard correctly. Reporters scribbled furiously, sensing the potential gravity of the moment. Even the judge, a man known for his composure and patience, paused, pen hovering over his notes. The defendant's face paled almost instantly. His hands, previously clasped in an attempt at calm, trembled subtly. A bead of sweat slid down his temple as he processed the unexpected observation from the child he likely underestimated. His eyes flicked nervously toward Emma, and then to Rex, whose gaze remained unflinching. The German shepherd's posture tightened further, a low growl vibrating in his chest, a sound that seemed almost human in its warning. The courtroom's energy shifted palpably, the air thick with tension and disbelief. Officer Daniels shifted slightly, repositioning Rex closer to the defendant. He whispered softly, a professional reminder to the dog, though even he felt a chill at the uncanny timing of the child's words. "Stay calm, Rex," he murmured, but the dog remained tense, eyes locked on the source of the instinctive warning. Jurors leaned forward in their seats, captivated. They whispered among themselves, murmurs of astonishment spreading through the gallery. Witnesses paused mid-note, reporters' pens hovered, and the judge's gavel rested silently, unstruck, as if honoring the moment. Emma's mother, Julia, froze with a mixture of pride, fear, and astonishment. Her hands clutched Emma's tiny frame tightly, heart pounding in her chest. "Did you hear that?" she whispered to no one in particular. Julia's voice trembled, aware that this moment would be remembered long after the courthouse emptied. Emma's small voice had cut through the formal proceedings with startling clarity. To everyone else, it was more than mere observation. It was insight, instinct, and truth distilled into two simple words. The courtroom's spectators struggled to absorb the scene. Some gasped audibly, while others whispered softly, their curiosity and disbelief palpable. Lawyers paused mid-discussion, reassessing the dynamic in front of them. This was no longer just a routine hearing. It had become a narrative of courage, intuition, and the unexpected intersection of innocence and trained skill. Jurors exchanged anxious glances, their deliberative minds now influenced by a child's perception and a dog's instincts, together forming a silent but undeniable statement about the defendant. Rex responded almost immediately to Emma's words. His growl deepened, resonating through the courtroom like a low rumble of warning. Muscles coiled, tail stiff, and ears pricked. The canine's body language unmistakably communicated alert, danger, and suspicion. Officers and spectators alike noticed the synchronicity between Emma's declaration and Rex's reaction. It was as if the two had formed a partnership, a silent, instinctual communication bridging human intuition and canine training. Even the judge leaned slightly forward, recognizing the extraordinary nature of the alignment. The defendant's unease became more pronounced. His attempts at composure failed under the scrutiny of the room. Eyes darting nervously between the child and the dog, he shifted in his seat, his palms sweaty against the armrest. Every movement, no matter how slight, seemed to amplify the perception of guilt or awareness of his own misdeeds. Spectators leaned closer, and murmurs rose as some whispered about the child's bravery, others about the dog's precision. The courtroom felt charged, a living organism responding to an unexpected moment of truth. attorneys quickly realized the potential impact. Whispered conversations emerged, notes exchanged, strategies subtly recalibrated. The courtroom had transformed to more than a legal arena. It had become a stage of instinct, perception, and emotion. Emma's voice, though small and simple, had altered the flow of proceedings. Her 2 words carried weight beyond comprehension. An innocent truth spoken with clarity, amplified by the presence of Rex and the reactions it elicited. Jurors, spectators, and even law enforcement officers sensed that something remarkable was happening, a convergence of courage, instinct, and undeniable evidence. Outside, reporters had begun to notice the unusual intensity within the room. Camera crews whispered into headsets, adjusting lenses, preparing to capture what they could. Social media notifications buzzed across phones as early witnesses described the scene. 3-year-old points to suspect. Police dog reacts. Courtroom stunned. Within minutes, the story began spreading, though most did not yet understand the full scope. Inside the courtroom, all focus remained on the child and the canine, a moment frozen in time by tension, observation, and instinct. The judge, a man experienced in handling unusual courtroom events, cleared his throat. He spoke slowly, carefully, his voice measured but commanding. Let the record reflect the child's observation and the dog's immediate reaction. His words, though brief, acknowledged the extraordinary nature of the moment, without bias or embellishment. Officers nodded subtly, jurors shifted in their seats, and spectators murmured again, this time in collective understanding that the ordinary had become extraordinary. Emma, blissfully unaware of the historical nature of her actions, relaxed slightly, her instinctive observation complete. Her eyes remained on Rex, her small hands now unclenching, as if her responsibility had been fulfilled. Yet the effect of her 2 words lingered like an invisible force throughout the room. The defendant slumped slightly, a man confronted not by the law alone, but by a child's innate perception and a dog's trained instincts. It was a silent verdict, a moment that spoke louder than any argument could. Whispers continued to circulate in the gallery. Observers debated the implications, speculated on what this might mean for the case, and marveled at the strange but undeniable power of instinct and intuition. Lawyers whispered to one another, adjusting tactics subtly, realizing the importance of public perception in addition to legal strategy. Officer Daniels patted Rex lightly, whispering words of praise, though both handler and dog were aware that this was no ordinary situation. The courtroom had witnessed something rare, something unforgettable, a child's voice paired with a canine's instincts, revealing a truth no one had expected. Even as the trial proceedings resumed, the energy in the room had shifted permanently. Emma's simple declaration, "Bad man," had injected a new gravity into the hearing. The defendant's demeanor had changed irreversibly. The jurors' focus had sharpened, and spectators hung on every word, every movement, every subtle cue. The courthouse, once a place of routine and monotony, now hummed with the tension of an extraordinary event. Emma, unknowingly, had become a central figure in a narrative of courage, instinct, and revelation, while Rex silently confirmed the weight of her observation. By the time the morning recess was called, the courtroom was alive with discussion, whispered speculation, and awe. Emma remained seated with her mother, content to watch and observe, unaware that she had altered the entire atmosphere of the trial. Reporter notepads were full. Whispers outside the room speculated on the unusual events, and even the officers recognized that they had witnessed something rare, a moment where innocence and trained skill converged to illuminate a hidden truth. For everyone present, it was a day they would never forget. Rex's low growl resonated through the courtroom, vibrating in the polished wooden floors and the tense air above the spectators' heads. It was a sound both warning and declarative, a trained canine reaction that carried more authority than most human voices. Officer Daniels gently tightened his grip on the leash, but the dog's body remained taut, alert, unyielding. Every muscle was coiled, every ear twitching at the slightest sound. To the untrained eye, it was simply a professional response. To those paying attention, it was confirmation, a silent affirmation of the 3-year-old's startling observation. The defendant shifted in his chair, eyes darting nervously, now fully aware of the intensity directed at him. He tried to maintain composure, fidgeting subtly with his hands, yet his body language betrayed the internal panic. His gaze flicked involuntarily toward Emma, then Rex, then the judge, seeking reassurance, or perhaps a silent cue that he could escape scrutiny. But there was none. The courtroom's collective attention had converged on the child and the dog, two unlikely participants whose presence now dominated the proceedings. Spectators in the gallery leaned forward, a mixture of astonishment and apprehension etched into their faces. Murmurs rippled quietly through the crowd, yet nobody dared speak above the low growl. Lawyers exchanged tense whispers, adjusting arguments in real time to account for the unprecedented dynamic. The jurors sat upright, eyes wide, noting every detail, the defendant's visible anxiety, the child's calm observation, the canine's disciplined yet unmistakably alert posture. It was as if the usual rhythm of a courtroom had been suspended, replaced with a live performance of instinct and intuition. Emma remained motionless, small hands clenched in her lap, though her gaze never wavered. To her, the reaction of the dog validated what she had felt instinctively. It was confirmation, though she could not articulate it in words. There was a strange harmony between her perception and Rex's trained response, a subtle but undeniable connection, bridging innocence and experience. Julia clutched her daughter's hand tightly, heart pounding, realizing that something extraordinary was unfolding before them, something that transcended the ordinary expectations of a courtroom hearing. Officer Daniels leaned slightly closer to the defendant, quietly murmuring, "Stay calm. Rex, stay calm." The dog, however, remained coiled, responding not to direct commands, but to the ambient cues, the defendant's nervous energy, the child's unwavering focus, and the charged atmosphere of the courtroom. Even for a seasoned handler, this was unusual. Rex's reaction was beyond simple obedience. It was instinct, honed through years of training, yet uniquely responsive to the moment. Jurors watched with fascination, some whispering softly to one another, realizing that the situation was unlike anything they had encountered before. The defendant's eyes darted toward the gallery, noticing the spectators' reactions, then back toward the bench. His composure faltered further under the weight of scrutiny. Subtle shifts in his posture, the tightening of his jaw, the clenching of his fists, all amplified the impression of unease. The combination of Emma's declaration and Rex's reaction created a feedback loop of tension, magnifying every micro-expression and gesture. Even the judge, a veteran of countless proceedings, leaned slightly forward, brow furrowed, acknowledging the rare and remarkable intersection of innocence and trained instincts unfolding before him. Whispers filled the courtroom, though they were carefully muted. "Did you see that?" One spectator asked another. "The dog is reacting exactly like she said. Incredible." Another murmured, "I've never seen anything like this in all my years in court." Lawyers exchanged quick glances, acknowledging that the courtroom's energy had shifted dramatically. What began as a routine hearing had transformed into a suspense-filled tableau, where every small movement and glance carried amplified significance. Emma's observation had set the tone. Rex's reaction confirmed it. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Outside, the courthouse buzzed with reporters who had received word of the unfolding spectacle. Camera crews whispered into their headsets, adjusting equipment, preparing to capture what would soon be a story of national interest. Phones buzzed with social media alerts. Early witnesses typing descriptions. 3-year-old identifies suspect. Police dog reacts. Courtroom stunned. Even before the events were fully documented, the story had begun spreading, fueled by the combined fascination with children, dogs, and moments of unexpected clarity. Inside the room, however, all attention remained on Emma, Rex, and the defendant. Emma's mother tried to soothe her daughter, whispering gently, "It's okay, sweetheart. Just watch." Julia's voice trembled with awe, awareness, and a touch of fear. She realized that this was more than a child's observation or a dog's trained behavior. It was a rare alignment of instincts, courage, and attention that few had ever witnessed. Emma's tiny presence carried authority far beyond her years, and Rex's disciplined response lent it undeniable credibility. The courtroom, a place typically dominated by procedure and decorum, had become a stage for something extraordinary. The defendant, increasingly aware of the courtroom's focused attention, shifted again in his seat. His composure waned, subtle signs of nervousness apparent to all. Beads of sweat formed along his brow, and his hands twisted in tension. The low growl from Rex seemed to punctuate each of the defendant's movements, a reminder that observation and instinct rarely lie. Jurors leaned forward, captivated by the scene, their thoughts racing. Even those unfamiliar with canine training sensed the weight of the dog's response, a low, subtle but unmistakable alert that something was amiss. Officer Daniels maintained calm, though internally he marveled at the uncanny synchronicity between Emma's declaration and Rex's reaction. Years of training had prepared him for alert behaviors, but rarely had he seen a child's instinct so perfectly mirrored in a dog's body language. It was extraordinary, almost uncanny. The courtroom held its breath as the scene unfolded, spectators caught in a mixture of awe and tension. Lawyers, recognizing the profound implications, adjusted their strategies, understanding that public perception, and perhaps even jury sentiment, had shifted dramatically in the span of a few moments. Emma, blissfully unaware of the courtroom drama she had influenced, remained seated with her hands clasped in her lap. She continued to watch Rex with rapt attention, sensing, in her small way, that her words had meaning and consequence. The alignment of her instinct and the dog's trained behavior created a silent communication, a bridge between innocence and experience that everyone else in the room could see but not fully understand. For spectators, it was riveting. For officers, it was remarkable. For the defendant, it was terrifying. The judge, observing the courtroom's heightened tension, remained calm outwardly, but allowed the moment to settle. He recognized that Emma's simple observation, amplified by Rex's response, had injected a unique gravity into the proceedings. The court, typically procedural and predictable, had been transformed into a space of raw human emotion, instinct, and suspense. Every movement, glance, and whisper now carried amplified significance. The ordinary day in court had become a moment of unexpected revelation, one that would be remembered long after the gavel struck again. Whispers persisted as officers subtly repositioned Rex, maintaining a safe distance but keeping the dog alert. The jurors leaned forward, captivated, while spectators exchanged awed glances. Lawyers murmured among themselves, quickly revising mental notes. The defendant's attempts to maintain composure faltered further under the combined weight of observation, instinct, and expectation. Emma, still calm in her tiny frame, had become the focal point, her simple words echoing in everyone's mind. The courtroom had transformed into a stage of suspense, awareness, and revelation, a place where innocence and training intersected to reveal something extraordinary. By the time a short recess was called, the courtroom remained charged. Spectators whispered in hushed tones, lawyers adjusted their positions, and the defendant slumped slightly, aware of the gravity of his situation. Emma, oblivious to the magnitude of her impact, clutched her mother's hand and looked at Rex, sensing a silent bond of understanding. Officer Daniels patted the dog lightly, whispering praise. The child and the canine had, unknowingly, set the stage for a courtroom drama that would capture attention far beyond these walls. A tale of courage, instinct, and the profound effects of simple, honest perception. The judge's gavel tapped softly, signaling a short recess, though no one left their seats immediately. The courtroom was still buzzing with an unusual energy, a tangible tension lingering in the air. Officer Daniels carefully guided Rex a few feet closer to the bench, whispering quietly to keep the dog calm. His trained instincts told him that this was no ordinary moment. Emma's declaration and Rex's response had created a scenario that required careful assessment. The defendant shifted nervously, avoiding eye contact, while spectators whispered in low tones, some pointing out the child and the dog in awe. Julia, Emma's mother, held her daughter close, her heart racing. She had tried to explain the courtroom environment to her 3-year-old, but now she realized that her own understanding had fallen short. Emma had said 2 words, simple, innocent, yet profound, and the impact had rippled through the room. The German shepherd's low growl and rigid stance had confirmed the child's observation, a silent testament to truth and instinct converging. Julia's mind raced with questions. Was her daughter really aware of what she had done? How could such a small voice carry so much weight? Officer Daniels spoke quietly with the lead court officer, discussing the unusual convergence of events. "I've trained Canine South for over 10 years, he whispered, but I've never seen a child's intuition align with a dog's response like this. It's remarkable and rare. We need to assess the situation carefully, make sure everyone stays safe, and that the evidence is preserved." The lead officer nodded, acknowledging the gravity of the moment. Outside the courtroom, whispers had begun to circulate among reporters, who sensed a story that could capture public imagination. The judge, maintaining his composure, called for the officers to provide a brief explanation to the courtroom. He spoke calmly, his tone measured but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are witnessing an unusual circumstance. The child's observation, combined with the canine's trained response, has provided a unique perspective on today's proceedings. For safety and clarity, we will pause momentarily to allow officers to assess the situation." Murmurs ran through the room, a mix of astonishment, curiosity, and disbelief. The defendant's unease deepened as the attention shifted squarely toward him. Spectators leaned forward, whispering among themselves. Some spoke in awe. "Did you see that?" The dog reacted instantly after she spoke. Others speculated quietly. How can a 3-year-old notice something like that? Jurors, attentive and engaged, noted every nuance: the defendant's pale complexion, the child's calm composure, and Rex's unwavering focus. Even the court reporter paused slightly, pen hovering, capturing each subtle shift in tone and posture. The courtroom had transformed into more than a legal space. It had become a stage for observation, instinct, and revelation. Emma, seated on her mother's lap, watched Rex closely. She sensed that her words had meaning, though she did not understand the full weight of their impact. Her tiny hands were clasped tightly together, and she occasionally glanced at her mother for reassurance. Julia whispered softly, "It's okay, sweetie. Just stay calm." Emma nodded subtly, her gaze returning to the German shepherd. The silent bond between child and dog was remarkable, a moment of instinctive understanding that no adult had orchestrated. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as officers quietly adjusted positions. Officer Daniels leaned slightly toward the judge and whispered, "Sir, Rex's reaction is consistent with his training, but it's unusual to see such alignment with a civilian, especially a child. We recommend documenting this carefully and ensuring that the defendant is observed closely. His behavior, coupled with her observation, may provide critical context for the proceedings. The judge nodded, appreciating the professionalism and discretion. Jurors, though unaware of the private conversation, sensed the gravity of the pause. The room's tension thickened, charged with anticipation and the weight of what had just occurred. The defendant shifted again, his composure clearly faltering. His attempts to appear calm were undermined by the scrutiny of the room, the unflinching gaze of a 3-year-old, and the German shepherd's low, warning growl. He glanced furtively toward the gallery, noting the reactions of spectators and jurors alike. His nervousness amplified under the collective attention, creating a feedback loop of tension. Lawyers whispered quickly among themselves, revising arguments and noting how the courtroom's perception might affect both deliberations and public opinion. Every subtle movement seemed to carry added weight outside the courtroom. News of the unusual event began spreading. Reporters quietly documented the presence of a 3-year-old who had observed something significant, coupled with a trained canine's response. Social media notifications began buzzing, early eyewitness accounts capturing the imagination of the local community. Camera crews adjusted equipment, anticipating a visual story of innocence, instinct, and heroism. Yet inside the courtroom, all focus remained on the delicate balance between observation, intuition, and the silent authority of a highly trained dog. Emma's words had created ripples that extended far beyond the immediate space. As the recess continued, Officer Daniels guided Rex subtly around the courtroom, allowing the dog to respond to environmental cues without overwhelming the defendant or spectators. Jurors observed quietly, captivated by the unusual dynamic. Spectators whispered softly, speculating about the child's perception and the dog's reaction. Julia held Emma close, proud but apprehensive, realizing that her daughter had unintentionally become central to an extraordinary moment in legal history. The room was alive with tension, curiosity, and awe, every individual aware that they were witnessing something remarkable, something rare, and something deeply human. Emma's presence continued to command attention. Her small voice, though barely audible in the courtroom's ambient noise, had created a profound shift. Rex's body language confirmed her perception, and officers and jurors alike acknowledged the power of the alignment. The child's innocence and the dog's trained instincts had combined to create a moment of clarity and suspense. The courtroom had transformed into a space where instinct, perception, and emotion intersected, and every movement, glance, and sound became charged with significance. The judge observed quietly, ensuring order while allowing the courtroom to process the unusual scene. He recognized that Emma's declaration and Rex's reaction had created a new dynamic that could not be ignored. Officers whispered discreetly, discussing next steps, while lawyers recalculated strategy in real time. The defendant, increasingly aware of his situation, fidgeted nervously. Spectators leaned forward, murmurs continuing, as everyone grappled with the extraordinary circumstances. Emma's simple words had unexpectedly shifted the course of the proceedings, reminding everyone that insight and courage often emerge in the most unlikely forms. Officer Daniels spoke softly to Julia, ensuring her daughter remained calm. "She's done nothing wrong, ma'am. But this moment is unusual. It's rare for a child's instincts to align so perfectly with a canine's trained response. Let's stay calm and let the proceedings continue safely." Julia nodded, heart pounding, grateful for the officer's professionalism. She whispered softly to Emma, reassuring her, though aware that her daughter's simple, honest perception had already left a lasting impression on everyone in the room. The defendant, fully aware of the combined scrutiny, slumped slightly in his seat. His attempts to maintain composure were failing under the weight of observation, instinct, and collective attention. Jurors leaned forward, captivated, noting every micro-expression. The courtroom had shifted from routine procedure to a suspenseful, almost theatrical display of perception and truth. Emma's words, though simple, had transformed the space. Rex's response validated the child's observation, confirming an unspoken truth. Everyone present, judges, lawyers, officers, jurors, spectators, felt the weight of what had occurred, a moment destined to be remembered. By the time the recess ended, the courtroom had fully absorbed the extraordinary events. Emma remained calm, sitting with her mother, hands clasped, eyes occasionally darting toward Rex. The German shepherd remained alert but composed, a silent participant in the courtroom drama. Officers subtly adjusted positions, lawyers whispered among themselves, and the defendant shifted nervously in response to the heightened tension. The extraordinary alignment of child and dog had changed the proceedings, creating a unique interplay of instinct, observation, and human emotion that would shape the remainder of the trial. The morning's ordinary courtroom, polished and quiet, had transformed into a stage for courage, perception, and instinct. A 3-year-old girl had spoken 2 words, simple, clear, and profound, and a trained police dog had responded in a way that confirmed her observation. The courtroom, jurors, officers, and spectators alike were left in awe, realizing that sometimes truth manifests in the most unexpected forms. Emma's innocent voice and Rex's disciplined instincts had created a moment that would echo far beyond the courthouse walls, leaving everyone present changed, captivated, and profoundly aware of the extraordinary in the ordinary. The courtroom settled into an uneasy silence as the recess ended. The air remained thick with tension, every seat seemingly charged with anticipation. Emma, perched on her mother's lap, blinked innocently, unaware of the ripples her words had created. Her small hands were clasped tightly together, and she occasionally glanced at Rex, sensing a quiet connection with the canine. The dog, trained to detect danger and respond to instinctive cues, remained calm yet alert, his head tilted slightly, eyes following the defendant's every movement. The courtroom was caught between routine procedure and an extraordinary moment of intuition. The defendant, visibly unsettled, adjusted his posture repeatedly, sweat glistening along his brow. Every glance Emma threw in his direction seemed to pierce deeper, her tiny frame projecting a clarity and perception that adults often struggled to convey. He shifted uneasily in his seat, trying to ignore the subtle warning signs emanating from the canine. Officer Daniels, noting the defendant's mounting discomfort, quietly reinforced Rex's positioning, maintaining a balance between vigilance and restraint. The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath, each individual aware that the unfolding events defied expectation. Jurors leaned forward in their seats, captivated by the interplay between child, dog, and defendant. Every subtle movement of the man was analyzed, every micro-expression noted. The weight of Emma's declaration, 2 words so simple yet so profound, hung in the room like an unspoken verdict. Lawyers whispered among themselves, recalibrating their strategy, realizing that public perception and juror interpretation were subtly shifting under the influence of innocence and instinct. Witnesses scribbled notes furiously, attempting to capture details for the record. Even the judge, stoic and experienced, paused momentarily, acknowledging the unusual and compelling scene before him. Emma's mother, Julia, tried to soothe her daughter, whispering gently, "You're doing great, sweetheart. Just watch and stay calm." Emma nodded slightly, her gaze still fixed on Rex. She didn't understand the legal nuances or the implications of her words, but she knew something significant had happened. The German shepherd's presence validated her instincts, and together they formed a quiet, undeniable force. The courtroom, typically procedural and orderly, had transformed into a space where intuition and instinct shaped perception and action. The defendant fidgeted, shifting his weight repeatedly, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Beads of sweat traced down his temples, betraying his internal panic. He glanced toward the gallery, observing spectators leaning forward, whispering in hushed tones. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, capturing every nuance of the moment. Outside, camera crews adjusted their lenses, anticipating the story that was already beginning to spread. Inside, every eye remained on Emma and Rex, the unusual pairing at the center of a courtroom drama that defied expectation. Officer Daniels subtly guided Rex closer, whispering reassurances while keeping the dog alert. He was aware that this was no ordinary courtroom moment. Years of training had prepared him for alert behaviors, but he had never witnessed such a precise alignment between a child's perception and a canine's response. The synchronicity was uncanny, a rare moment where instinct, observation, and human emotion converged. Jurors noted the heightened tension, understanding instinctively that the situation carried significance far beyond what words alone could convey. Whispers circulated throughout the courtroom. Spectators speculated quietly, trying to reconcile the simplicity of Emma's words with the gravity of the moment. "She's just a child," one murmured. Yet Rex's reaction? "It's like he knows something we don't." Lawyers exchanged quick glances, realizing that strategy alone could not account for the courtroom's evolving dynamic. The defendant's nervous glances and shifting posture amplified the room's tension, creating an invisible spotlight on his behavior. Emma, unaware of the effect she had unleashed, remained calm and composed, her eyes reflecting quiet observation and curiosity. The judge, aware of the unusual intensity, spoke softly but clearly. "Let it be noted for the record that the child's observation and the canine's response have been acknowledged. We will proceed with the case, taking into account all evidence and behavior." His voice carried authority and calm, yet it also recognized the unique circumstances. Jurors leaned forward, scribbling notes, capturing the interplay between instinct and observation. The defendant's discomfort intensified under the silent scrutiny of the room, compounded by the presence of a child who saw more than anyone expected. Outside the courtroom, reporters prepared to document the events. Phones buzzed with early social media posts. 3-year-old identifies suspect. Police dog reacts. Courtroom stunned. Camera crews adjusted positions, capturing the visual tension of child, dog, and defendant in one frame. News of the unusual alignment spread quickly, signaling a story that combined innocence, trained skill, and unexpected insight. Inside, the courtroom remained focused, the air thick with anticipation, every observer aware that the ordinary had become extraordinary. Julia held Emma close, whispering reassurance, though her own pulse raced. She understood, in a way only a mother could, that her daughter had created a moment few could fully comprehend. Emma's words had revealed truth in a subtle, instinctive way, and Rex's disciplined response had amplified that truth. The courtroom, a space normally dominated by procedure and authority, had become a stage for intuition and perception. The ordinary day had transformed into something remarkable, something that would be remembered for years. The defendant's hands trembled slightly, his attempts at composure faltering under the scrutiny of the courtroom. Every small movement was magnified by the silent, collective attention of the room. Jurors leaned forward, captivated, aware that they were witnessing behavior and instinct that could influence their perception. Lawyers whispered quietly, adjusting their strategies, balancing legal argument with the subtle weight of the unfolding spectacle. Officer Daniels maintained a careful hold on Rex, aware that any sudden movement could escalate tension, yet trusting the dog's instincts to guide the interaction. Emma, sitting on her mother's lap, remained focused on Rex. She didn't fully grasp the courtroom's gravity, but she knew her words had meaning. The child's perception, combined with the canine's trained instincts, created a rare alignment of observation and instinct. The room seemed suspended, every observer aware that they were part of something extraordinary. Even the judge, experienced in handling unexpected courtroom events, observed quietly, recognizing the significance without interference. Whispers continued as the defendant shifted nervously. Spectators and jurors alike noted the subtle changes, the nervous fidgeting, the heightened tension. Lawyers leaned toward one another, making discreet notes, recalculating strategy in real time. Officer Daniels subtly adjusted Rex's positioning, maintaining vigilance while ensuring the courtroom remained calm. Every individual was aware of the unique dynamic unfolding, the alignment of a child's insight and a dog's trained reaction, creating a moment that transcended ordinary legal proceedings. By mid-morning, the courtroom had settled into a tense rhythm. Emma remained calm and observant, her tiny hands resting lightly on her lap. Rex, alert yet disciplined, mirrored the child's focus. The defendant's discomfort persisted, a silent but visible acknowledgement of the scrutiny he faced. Jurors continued to observe, lawyers adapted strategy, and spectators whispered in quiet astonishment. The courtroom, typically procedural and predictable, had become a stage for instinct, intuition, and subtle human perception, all centered around a remarkable trio: a child, a dog, and a man whose actions now faced amplified scrutiny. Officer Daniels whispered quietly to the judge, explaining the dog's reaction and the unusual alignment with Emma's observation. "It's remarkable, sir. The child's perception is instinctive, and Rex's response confirms it. We need to proceed carefully, ensuring everyone's safety while respecting the courtroom process." The judge nodded, acknowledging the rare and extraordinary circumstance. Jurors, spectators, and lawyers alike sensed that they were witnessing something unforgettable: the intersection of innocence, trained skill, and unspoken truth. The day's proceedings continued, but the energy in the room had shifted irrevocably. Emma's 2 words, so small, so simple, had created a profound impact. Rex's response amplified the meaning, signaling alert, awareness, and truth. Every observer, from jurors to spectators to reporters, recognized the extraordinary nature of the alignment. The defendant's growing discomfort, the child's calm observation, and the dog's unwavering vigilance combined to form a powerful tableau of instinct, courage, and revelation. By the end of the morning session, it was clear that this day would not be forgotten. Emma had become an unexpected central figure, her words reverberating through the room. Rex's disciplined response had validated her insight, and the courtroom had collectively acknowledged the unusual and extraordinary moment. Officers, lawyers, jurors, and spectators left with a profound understanding that sometimes truth and courage manifest in the most unlikely forms, often through the smallest voices and the sharpest instincts. By early afternoon, the atmosphere in the Franklin County courtroom was electric. Spectators, once whispering quietly among themselves, now leaned forward with wide eyes, fully aware that an extraordinary moment was unfolding. The media presence outside had grown, cameras and microphones set up to capture the story, while inside, the courtroom buzzed with tension that could be cut with a knife. Jurors remained rigid, their attention glued to every subtle movement, the defendant's nervous gestures, the child's calm yet observant demeanor, and the German shepherd's disciplined, alert posture. Emma remained on her mother's lap, small hands clasped in her lap, her gaze fixed firmly on Rex. She sensed the dog's alertness and mirrored it instinctively, her 3-year-old mind recognizing that something significant was happening. Her voice had already spoken 2 words, "Bad man," and the impact resonated across the courtroom like ripples in a still pond. What followed was beyond her comprehension, yet she felt a sense of responsibility, as though she were part of a team working in silent communication. The defendant shifted uneasily in his chair, his once confident demeanor beginning to crumble. He avoided eye contact, his hands twisting nervously, fingers tapping on the polished wood. Beads of sweat traced down his forehead. Every subtle movement seemed magnified under the scrutiny of the courtroom. Officers remained alert, though they allowed the defendant some space, understanding that the psychological pressure from a child's observation and a canine's instincts could be as impactful as any testimony. The judge's calm voice directed the proceedings, yet the extraordinary tension in the room remained palpable. Lawyers whispered quietly among themselves, adjusting strategy on the fly. The unusual alignment of Emma's observation and Rex's reaction had changed the courtroom dynamic in ways no one could have anticipated. Every glance, gesture, and movement carried amplified significance, forcing attorneys to tread carefully. Even seasoned legal professionals acknowledged that this was no ordinary hearing. This was a high-stakes, psychological and instinctive drama playing out under the roof of the courthouse. Spectators and jurors alike were fully captivated, their eyes following the subtle interplay between child, dog, and defendant. Officer Daniels maintained a close, yet respectful, position near Rex, keeping the dog alert but under control. He whispered quietly, "Stay calm, Rex. Watch and observe." The German shepherd remained tense, body coiled, ears pricked, eyes locked on the defendant. His growl was low and subtle, a warning not just to the man but to the entire courtroom. Attention was focused, perception was sharp, and instinct had declared its silent verdict. Even those unfamiliar with canine behavior could sense the seriousness, the unspoken tension that underscored the room. Outside the courtroom, reporters quietly recorded every detail they could, anticipating the story that would soon capture national attention. Phones buzzed with early social media posts. 3-year-old identifies suspect. Police dog reacts. Courtroom stunned. Video crews adjusted their angles, ready to broadcast a story that blended innocence, trained skill, and courage into a single unforgettable tableau. Inside the courthouse, however, all eyes remained on the extraordinary trio Emma, Rex, and the defendant whose interactions had transformed what should have been a routine trial into a spectacle of instinct, perception, and revelation. The defendant's anxiety intensified with each passing moment. His once confident posture was now slumped, shoulders tight, hands clenched, eyes darting furtively between Emma, Rex, and the judge. The murmurs of spectators and jurors seemed to magnify the tension, each whisper reinforcing the gravity of the moment. Lawyers paused mid-sentence, adjusting arguments, acutely aware that public perception and jury sentiment were being influenced not by evidence alone, but by instinct, intuition, and the extraordinary presence of a child and a dog in perfect alignment. Emma, seemingly oblivious to the dramatic tension, remained calm and focused. Her small hands rested lightly on her mother's arm as she continued to watch Rex, absorbing the energy of the room in her own quiet, instinctive way. Her 2 words had already shaken the courtroom, yet her silent presence continued to influence the dynamics of attention, perception, and judgment. The alignment of her intuition with Rex's trained instincts created an almost electric atmosphere, each observer acutely aware that the ordinary had been transformed into the extraordinary. The judge observed carefully, maintaining order while allowing the room to breathe within the tension. He recognized that Emma's declaration and Rex's reaction had fundamentally altered the courtroom environment. The defendant's shifting posture and visible anxiety were impossible to ignore, and even seasoned professionals sensed that the psychological pressure was mounting. Jurors leaned forward, some taking frantic notes, others simply observing, aware that they were witnessing a rare alignment of truth, innocence, and instinct that transcended conventional testimony. Officer Daniels subtly guided Rex closer, ensuring the dog's alertness was controlled but unmistakable. Rex's growl remained low and steady, a sound of authority that resonated throughout the courtroom. The defendant flinched slightly at the noise, an involuntary reaction that drew the attention of jurors and spectators alike. Emma's gaze, still unwavering, seemed to amplify the dog's response. There was an unspoken bond, a silent communication that elevated the courtroom from routine procedure to a stage of suspense, revelation, and subtle human drama. Spectators whispered quietly, exchanging glances of awe. "Did you see that? A dog is reacting exactly like she said," one whispered. "And the way the man's sweating. It's incredible," another murmured. Jurors scribbled notes, attorneys adjusted arguments, and witnesses paused in fascination. The ordinary rhythm of the courtroom had given way to a heightened, almost theatrical display of perception and instinct. Emma's small voice had shifted the room's energy, and Rex's disciplined response underscored the moment with undeniable authority. Outside, the story was spreading rapidly. Social media alerts buzzed, reporters typed furiously, and live feeds prepared coverage that would soon reach a national audience. The scene, a child identifying danger, a dog confirming it, and a man visibly cracking under pressure captivated both the public and professionals. Inside, however, the courtroom's focus remained entirely on the trio at the center of this unfolding drama. Emma's observation, Rex's instinct, and the defendant's response had created a rare moment of human and animal synergy that demanded attention. The defendant's attempts at composure faltered completely. His body language betrayed panic, hands trembling slightly, eyes darting, jaw tight. Even his breathing seemed uneven under the intense scrutiny. Jurors leaned forward, captivated by the intricate interplay of instinct and observation, realizing that they were witnessing something beyond the ordinary scope of the law. Lawyers whispered rapidly, recalibrating their strategies as the courtroom energy continued to shift dramatically. Officer Daniels remained vigilant, aware that the next moments could be pivotal. Emma, still calm, blinked slowly, absorbing the room's energy in her own quiet way. She did not fully understand the implications of the courtroom tension, nor the magnitude of her words, yet her instincts remained sharp. She watched Rex's subtle movements, the tilt of his head, the slight tension in his limbs, the low growl vibrating softly. Every observer noticed the silent communication, the unspoken confirmation of a child's perception validated by a canine's trained instincts. It was extraordinary, a rare alignment of human and animal awareness that defied explanation. The judge called for order, though his voice carried a subtle acknowledgement of the moment's uniqueness. "We will proceed," he said, measured and calm, with recognition of the unusual alignment observed today. Jurors took notes diligently, spectators leaned forward, and lawyers adjusted tone and strategy. The courtroom, already charged with tension, now seemed to move with a collective awareness that this was a day that would be remembered. Emma's words, Rex's response, and the defendant's visible unease had transformed the space into something far beyond ordinary judicial proceedings. As proceedings continued, every movement and glance carried amplified significance. The defendant shifted nervously, his discomfort growing as the alignment of child and dog remained unmistakable. Officer Daniels kept Rex alert, allowing the canine's subtle cues to communicate vigilance and discernment. Jurors, spectators, and lawyers alike observed with rapt attention, aware that every interaction might contribute to the unfolding narrative. Emma's two words had catalyzed a chain of perception and instinct that no one could ignore, and the courtroom was fully immersed in the gravity of the moment. By late afternoon, the extraordinary alignment had reached its peak. Emma's calm observation, Rex's disciplined response, and the defendant's crumbling composure created a tableau of suspense, revelation, and human drama. The courtroom, jurors, spectators, and officers were fully absorbed in the interplay of instinct and perception, a moment destined to be remembered. Emma had become the unlikely center of attention. Her two simple words, a catalyst that transformed an ordinary trial into a remarkable event, blending innocence, courage, and unspoken understanding into a moment of profound significance. The courtroom had transformed into a space where ordinary procedure and extraordinary insight collided. Emma, small and seemingly delicate, sat perched on her mother's lap, her eyes quietly observing Rex. The German shepherd, disciplined and alert, mirrored the tension of the room with subtle movements, a slight tilt of the head, a low growl vibrating through his chest, and eyes locked intently on the defendant. Every subtle cue amplified the weight of the moment. Spectators leaned forward, jurors scribbled notes furiously, and even the judge, composed yet attentive, allowed the rare silence to hold, recognizing the gravity of what was unfolding. The defendant's discomfort had reached its peak. His once confident demeanor had eroded entirely, replaced by visible anxiety, trembling hands, and a face pale with apprehension. He glanced at the child, then at the dog, and then to the judge, as if searching for an escape that did not exist. Every movement was scrutinized, every micro-expression amplified by the courtroom's heightened awareness. The alignment of Emma's perception and Rex's instincts created a silent yet undeniable verdict that transcended words. Observers felt it in the air, a truth that was impossible to ignore. Officer Daniels maintained a calm yet firm grip on Rex's leash, his eyes scanning the room while simultaneously monitoring the dog's body language. He whispered softly, "Easy. Rex, stay alert." The German shepherd relaxed slightly under the careful guidance, yet remained vigilant, responding to subtle environmental cues. The courtroom seemed to breathe collectively with the duo, each observer acutely aware that they were witnessing something extraordinary, a convergence of innocence, trained skill, and human insight that defied explanation. The ordinary hearing had transformed into a dramatic tableau of instinct and revelation. Jurors leaned forward in their seats, fully captivated. Their eyes darted between Emma, Rex, and the defendant, trying to absorb every detail. The child's calm and direct observation, coupled with the dog's trained and precise reaction, weighed heavily on their perception. Lawyers whispered among themselves, recalibrating strategy in real time. Even the seasoned court reporter paused, pen hovering, capturing the subtle drama. Outside the courtroom, reporters prepared to document a story that had already captured public imagination, a narrative of courage, intuition, and the unexpected power of innocence. Emma's mother, Julia, whispered softly to her daughter, trying to steady her. "You're doing amazing, sweetheart. Just stay calm." Emma nodded slightly, her gaze unwavering as she continued to observe Rex. Her 3-year-old mind absorbed the energy of the room, sensing tension and unease without fully understanding it. Yet her instincts remained precise and unshakable. The courtroom, though filled with adults, had become a stage for the quiet authority of a small child and a disciplined canine, both of whom conveyed clarity, awareness, and courage far beyond their years and training. The judge spoke, his voice calm yet firm, acknowledging the unusual circumstances. "Let the record reflect the child's observation and the canine's response," he said. "We will proceed with caution, taking into account all evidence presented and the behaviors observed today." Jurors scribbled notes, spectators leaned forward, and lawyers adjusted tone and approach. The defendant's unease deepened, his composure faltering under the silent judgment that emanated from the alignment of Emma's words and Rex's instincts. The courtroom was fully engaged, each participant acutely aware that this day would not soon be forgotten. Officer Daniels subtly guided Rex closer to the defendant, ensuring vigilance while maintaining restraint. The dog's body language communicated awareness and alertness without aggression, a balance achieved only through years of careful training and discipline. The defendant flinched slightly at the subtle cues, an involuntary reaction that drew immediate attention. Jurors exchanged glances, witnesses paused in fascination, and spectators whispered quietly among themselves. Emma's small voice and Rex's precise behavior had created a silent consensus of attention, observation, and unspoken judgment. The courtroom had become a stage for instinct, courage, and revelation. The defendant shifted in his seat, trying unsuccessfully to regain composure. His palms were sweaty, fingers twisting nervously, eyes darting anxiously between Emma, Rex, and the judge. The subtle yet powerful alignment of perception and instinct had unmasked a vulnerability he could not hide. Jurors leaned forward, captivated, aware that they were witnessing more than procedural justice. They were witnessing a convergence of innocence and trained instinct that revealed truths beyond testimony alone. Lawyers whispered quietly, adjusting arguments in response to the extraordinary tension and scrutiny. Emma, still seated on her mother's lap, continued to watch Rex closely. Her small hands rested lightly on Julia's arm, but her focus remained unwavering. She sensed, in her intuitive way, that the courtroom's attention was fixed on the trio at the center of the drama. The German shepherd's movements, subtle but precise, communicated vigilance and confirmation. Spectators and jurors alike observed every gesture, every glance, aware that a silent verdict was being formed. Emma's word, simple, direct, and unflinching, had catalyzed a moment of insight that transcended her age and understanding. Defendant's posture slumped further as the courtroom absorbed the cumulative weight of observation, instinct, and evidence. Officers and lawyers alike noted the psychological impact of the alignment between Emma and Rex. Whispered exchanges occurred quietly among attorneys, as strategy evolved to account for not only the evidence, but also the extraordinary influence of perception and instinct on the jury. The courtroom's energy was palpable, each observer aware that a moment of rare human and animal synergy had reshaped the trial's atmosphere. Outside the courtroom, media coverage intensified. Social media buzzed with posts describing the extraordinary events. 3-year-old identifies suspect. Police dog confirms. Courtroom stunned. Reporters hurried to document the story, capturing the tableau of child, dog, and defendant in photographs and video feeds. The narrative of courage, instinct, and insight had already begun spreading, creating anticipation and awe across the community. Inside, however, all eyes remained on the proceedings. The weight of truth conveyed through observation and instinct rather than conventional testimony. The judge, fully aware of the extraordinary situation, maintained authority while allowing the moment to settle. He observed quietly, noting the defendant's behavior, the child's calm demeanor, and the dog's precise responses. The courtroom's rhythm had shifted from ordinary procedure to a living tableau of suspense and revelation. Jurors continued to take meticulous notes, spectators leaned forward, and lawyers recalibrated their arguments. Emma's small voice had created a ripple effect, amplified by Rex's trained instincts, creating a moment that none present would ever forget. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was only minutes, the defendant was called to answer directly. The room fell silent. Every eye tracked his every move. He shifted nervously, but the presence of Emma and Rex left no room for deception. The defendant's response, or lack thereof, carried more weight than words alone. Officers maintained vigilance, ready to act if necessary, but the psychological impact had already taken hold. Jurors exchanged glances, understanding that the alignment of observation, instinct, and courage had revealed an undeniable truth. When the gavel finally struck to adjourn for the day, the room remained in awe. Emma, still small and calm, had played an extraordinary role. Rex's disciplined behavior had amplified her observation, creating a synergy of instinct and insight rarely seen. Officers discreetly praised the dog, while Julia hugged her daughter tightly, whispering words of pride and reassurance. The defendant, visibly shaken, was led away under supervision, fully aware that he had faced not just the law, but the intuitive insight of a child, and the trained perception of a K-9 dot as the courtroom emptied. Whispers continued. Spectators discussed what they had witnessed, jurors reviewed notes, and officers quietly debriefed one another. The narrative of courage, instinct, and perception had left a lasting impression. Outside, reporters prepared their stories, capturing the extraordinary tale. A 3-year-old girl whose 2 words, "bad man," and a police dog's disciplined response had together revealed a hidden truth, creating a moment that would resonate far beyond the walls of the courthouse. Emma, blissfully unaware of the magnitude of her impact, held her mother's hand, her eyes bright and curious. Rex sat obediently by Officer Daniels, head tilted slightly, alert but calm. The courtroom had witnessed an event of rare human and animal synergy, a moment where innocence, instinct, and courage converged to reveal truth. The ordinary had become extraordinary, and a story of bravery and insight had been etched into the memories of all who were present. The day ended with a quiet sense of resolution. Justice had been observed, not just through law, but through the subtle power of perception and instinct. Emma's bravery, though unintentional, had left an indelible mark, while Rex's training had validated her insight. Officers, jurors, spectators, and legal professionals alike would remember the extraordinary courtroom drama where a child and a dog together spoke louder than words, revealing truth in its purest and most unexpected form.